years ago. And you're doing well, Don. You're looking really good. Have you enjoyed the day so far?
Huh?
Have you enjoyed the day so far?
Yes, very much indeed. Yeah, you've got a gorgeous day for it. One likes to give the crowd cover. You've got these guys are going to be looking in the sun for a while.
It's actually very easy to display the airplane. We don't need to go mad. We don't need to, obviously it's an old aeroplane, it's an A model as well, so there are corners of the envelope, shall we say, that you have to respect, and where you can get yourself into it.
Well, Mitch, you've got to get off soon to Milton Hall, your operating base for the day. You're going to the Wasp, aren't you?
Yeah, great. Helicopter.
You've been transported with the Wasp and the Ants?
Yes.
I bet you don't get that anywhere else.
No.
The aeroplane has been based here at Duxford for a good many years now.
Yes, since 1975, and as a result of that, this aircraft now one of the most important flying memorials one can think of to the heroism of the bomber crews of the Second World War. The sole airworthy B-17 Flying Fortress currently extant in Europe.
This aircraft, of course, a real star, a film star no less.
Flying on the UK display circuit for now some 36 years. Another underside view coming up. Korean War, there were a couple of reconnaissance units equipped with Mustangs during that conflict. Earlier from Ron Dean, when we spoke to him, of how the early jet fighters that went into service in Korea were in some ways inferior to the piston engine fighters that had preceded them, because the early jets were fairly short-legged and their engines could be rather delicate. And that was why, in the early stages of the conflict, jet-powered F-80 shooting stars were in fact replaced in service with some frontline units with the more fuel-efficient F-51 Mustangs. Mustangs were also longer range and could better endure the primitive conditions on the South Korean air bases. The unit prepared to transition to the Sabre. Final pass then from the Korean War veteran TF-51D, so in Korea by the South African and the Royal Australian Air Forces. But there we saw a US Air Force veteran of the 1950 to 53 war.
Mentioned right now, this is from earlier on, Lieutenant Don A. Reed, Royal Navy, retired.
Debut at the Autumn Air Show that year. Initially it was painted in a silver scheme with a Spitfire that served in Germany post-war. But in 2000, in tribute to the great fighter ace Johnny Johnson, who was attending Flying Legends,
targeting role of aircraft in support of
into that campaign. It started out with 3 examples of the Stinson L5 Sentinel. Phosphorus or smoke rockets, the pilot being aided by a US Army observer. They also carried out long-range reconnaissance at the supply routes. With
you see the Harvard actually on the ground parked up. It's amazing how huge this aircraft is.
So braking to land. And controls. And on the roll, ladies and gentlemen, imminently taking off for its first public display from the Air Atlantique Classic flight at the new airbase facility at Coventry Airport, the Gloucester Meteor T7. Rolls-Royce Derwents powering this aircraft. The first prototype was actually powered by two of the Frank Whittle designed Rover-built W2B engines, but problems meant that the Duke prototype Meteor was actually the first to fly on the 5th of March 1943. That aircraft had two Halford H1 power plants, the unit later developed into the de Havilland Goblin. But it was a developed version of the Metropolitan Vickers, or Metrovic F2, that was selected to power the production Meteor 1s as the Rolls-Royce Welland. From the 16th example of the Meteor Mark III onwards, the power plant switched to the Rolls-Royce Derwent, and that remained standard throughout the rest of the Meteor's life. Modified Meteor F4 set new outright world air speed records in 1945 and 46. They were the source of much pride in Britain. And then the F8 became Fighter Command's standard day fighter in the mid-50s. It's the two-seat trainer variant, the Meteor T7 that we see. This became the standard jet trainer in the RAF's advanced flying schools during that same period of the early to mid-50s. In the form of a heavy landing in January 1950. It had to be repaired by Gloucester before redelivery to number 203 Advanced Flying School at Driffield in November of that same year. And it's the number 203 AFS markings in which this aircraft has been restored. Restoration to airworthiness began at Yatesbury in Wiltshire. And Air Atlantique became involved towards the end of the last decade. The aircraft moved to Kendal, now Cotswold Airport, and it undertook its maiden post-restoration flight on the 14th of June this year in the hands of Dan Griffith. Meteor. A dozen Meteors from number 77 Squadron encountered a much larger force of MiG-15s over Pyongyang. And while one Meteor may have scored an aerial success, 3 more were themselves destroyed. Their pilots were amongst 38 from that Australian unit to be lost during hostilities in Korea. Also, in seeing these aircraft, Meteors were the first jets to be stationed near RAF Duxford when number 91 Squadron took delivery of Meteor 3s from October 1946.
Big danger for pilots is overconfidence, and if you're overconfident, the Tiger will find you out. Even the most experienced pilots find that. And we think that that is the reason for the Tiger Moth's enduring life. Anyway, we're going to start the display once the Meteor is cleared, which it has, so off we go. They're taking off in 3 Vixen, but in a previous life was a Phantom pilot. He's accompanied by Mike Vasey, known to some of you from his attachment to Vintech, and then by Peter Benest, who's also a former airline pilot. On the there with Jeremy Radcliffe, Duncan Green, and John Turnbull, all with ex-military backgrounds, all flying civilian airplanes. And then David Wildridge, before we do surnames, bringing up the rear. David flying civilian jets as well. Robin flew with EasyJet for some time after being a Phantom pilot. Sound you hear, that is the major engine. The major engine is quite an interesting achievement because it is I mentioned about production numbers earlier. The numbers were made up in various countries. The Canadians, where it's a bit colder, actually produced Tiger Moths. There's still many out there. There's over 200 Tiger Moths flying in Australia. There's something like 100 flying in America, 150 flying in Canada. Just over 200 here. Australia's ahead of us. All of those countries can now display a Tiger Moth. Down the road at the Cambridge Flying Group, you can do an ab initio course, or you can do a conversion course and learn to fly on a Tiger Moth. And judging by the people I know there, I can tell you they're finding it quite a challenge. So for the determined, and those with lots of patience, it's something you might wish to do. I'd like the organisers at Duxford for inviting the Tiger 1934. Sir Alan Cobham was storming around the countryside, trying to enthuse everyone. So I think you'll agree the Tiger Moth is a very controllable aircraft in the right hands. So strongest. One pilot, John Hughes, actually did 2,328 loops, 2,190 rolls, and 5 inverted rolls, plus numerous other maneuvers. Tiger 8, or the Duxford pensioners may be called, over 80, or nearly 80 rather. It all goes quiet when they do a synchronised switch off. But thank you very much indeed again, ladies and gentlemen. I'll hand you back to Ben.
Mitch. We haven't seen that from the Belgian F-16 before. Post-war Cessna light aeroplane, the Model 170. The US Army wanted a new observation fire control design, showed its toughness from the outset. For example, in 1952, the US Army L-19 had 12 feet of its starboard wing shot off by anti-aircraft fire, and it was repaired and it flew again the next day. Murdoch perhaps best known for its exploits, not in Korea so much, but in Vietnam. The majority of the force was turned over to the US Air Force from the Army as the Army increasingly became a helicopter force. Most of the deliveries were over Vietnam and US Air Force.
His wife and 5 children on board the aircraft, and then managed to land the Bird Dog on the deck of the US aircraft carrier, the USS Midway. This aircraft flown today, representing that particular aircraft. Amazing story.
It is indeed, yes. Major Guang Li, he was named, and he flew out over the South China Sea, hoping to find a US carrier, and I believe he even dropped a note onto the deck of the carrier, unless I'm much mistaken, to indicate his landing intentions. It was the first Bird Dog ever to land on a carrier, unsurprisingly perhaps. Yes, Justin Needham, who owns and flies this aircraft, which is based in Lincolnshire, operates it as a flying memorial to all the Ford Air Control pilots who lost their lives in the Vietnam conflict. It's a 1957 vintage machine, this, which was delivered straight to France's Aviation Légère de l'Armée de Terre, the French Army Aviation, served until 1991. It went into private ownership positions. Also notable is that huge antenna, an 8-foot whip antenna on the upper surfaces, which was used when the aircraft would get down low into the jungle canopy or amongst the weeds.
And just taking off, ladies and gentlemen, the 2 Cub L4s. Now these fulfilled the same kind of role that we've just been discussing. And during the latter stages of the Second World War, particularly as the aerial observation post, directing in artillery. So if you were the enemy, the last thing you would want to see would be one of these arriving over the hedge. And these little cubs would be flown from very rough, but a particularly dangerous job this, of course, because at low level you are susceptible to ground fire. So whilst this display might look like fun, in real terms, very dangerous profession.
The aircraft, or one of the aircraft types, was replaced in US Army service by the L-19 Bird Dog that we've just seen. A small number of L4s such as these were in service in the Korean theatre with US Army and US. A very attractive pair, these 2 L4A Grasshoppers. The aircraft in the lead, coded 57H, represents one with a very interesting history. There's another familiar Duxford name getting airborne, Mark Miller in the Oster 5J1 Autocrat. This is a civilian Oster, but here it represents the AOP-6 versions, which were used by the Royal Air Force South of Canada in the immediate post-war years before producing a versatile utility aircraft that operated a land plane, a float plane, or on skis with minimal modification. It had a big high-lift wing, a powerful Pratt with the R985 radial engine, which was bestowed on the Eva. L-20s and GPU-6s service all over the world with the US military, and And they saw further action as well. A US Army L-20 was shot down over the demilitarized zone in Korea in early 1955 with the loss of 2 crew. They were employed in Vietnam too, with US forces and with Air America. All over Europe. These were operations by the US Army Berlin Brigade, and the British Army Air Corps flew them for some 30 years. They were hugely active in support of the British Army, including in Borneo, the Aden Protectorate, and in Northern Ireland. I think the Army Air Corps says Beaver was the Army's primary surveillance platform in Northern Ireland, not the terrorists. A very attractive one indeed. Those of you who've seen, particularly the Army Air Corps, historic aircraft like this, may notice the engine note is a bit higher pitched on this aircraft than on the Army example. This is because this one is fitted with a Hartzell 3-bladed propeller. It's also got the military specification long-range fuel tanks mounted internally in the wingtips, which gives it impressive range. For the moment, as the Beaver comes into land, we stay with light aircraft of the Korean conflict, but we move to the other side. We saw a representative in the display today of the communist forces operating.
And one thing you can notice from this perspective is the way that the undercarriage folds up, but it doesn't actually retract fully. You can see the wheels protruding from the underside.
Very useful for them to have a 2-seat dual control conversion trainer variant of the type. Of course, it will enable them to train up new pilots in future for the
Là, c'est Roger dans le petit bas. Il vient nous chercher. Roger, braque.
Russ, you were just telling us a moment ago that you yourself
I was thinking this movie, checked out on the aeroplane, but unfortunately Air Force Manager got promoted and posted to be flying pushing the speed up to about probably just over 200 at the moment.
Good chance there as he banks towards the ground to see the this, I think, a very painful outside turn.
It can be, that's for sure. That's for sure.
September 2008, Dan graduated from advanced flying training and was selected to become a qualified flying instructor at Winton News. Dan's next posting, I believe, will be to what is still at present number 19 Squadron at RAF Valley to complete his tactical weapons training, though that unit is, as we mentioned earlier, being redesignated as number 4 Reserve Squadron. That will become before he progresses to a frontline unit, hopefully to fly the Eurofighter Typhoon in the future. So Dan Hayes touching down in the Tucano. Russ Morley, thank you very much indeed for joining us to talk through that, as the other representatives of the modern British Armed Forces take to the air at the end of the flight line in the shape of the 2 linked helicopters of the Royal Navy Black Cats. They're going off to hold.
nearest us, clearly wearing the invasion stripes.
Look out to the right, coming in for its solo display, Radial Revelations, Beach 18 3TN. Regular slate, for many years, not least when
Thank you very much for the introduction. I'll be commentating today by the Royal Navy Helicopter Display Team, the Black Cats. It is truly a privilege to be invited here to Duxford. We look forward to showing you what the Lynx can do, and in particular for the very last display, or public display of the season, for Chris and Dave Fleming, who have been the Black Cats display team this year. So Chris Chambers, the lead, is now making his way out to your left-hand side, and he orders an opposition wing over for his float aircraft back to the centre of the crowd. This is the quickest way of reversing the direction of any helicopter, and also the standard way of approaching the pilot. The aircraft are approaching each other head-to-head at a closing speed of approximately 200 camera mounted on the nose of each aircraft, and this identifies it as the Mark 8 version Saturn Royal Navy Maritime Lynx helicopter. The Lynx is still a very agile helicopter, famously demonstrated by the British Army that can fly a loop. The Mark 8's weapon systems and sensors make this aircraft much heavier than a maritime position, certainly on the back of a ship. We all know that the special thing about helicopters is that they can stop in mid-air and turn on a sixpence, but the trick that the Lynx keeps up its sleeve is that it can do it on the ground as well. The Lynx needs to be able to do this so that on the back of a ship, wherever the wind is coming from, it can always make a departure into wind. And equally, they can land into wind even if the ship is transiting and confined and restricted in its ability to manoeuvre. So it can land facing the stern whilst the ship is going into wind. Anti-surface warfare and anti-submarine warfare using the Skewer and Stingray depth charge weapon systems, but it also can operate for SAR roles, search and rescue, winching and load lifting. The aircraft are now positioning themselves for some precise hover manoeuvres. The first manoeuvre is called the carousel, which has been a Black Cat's favourite right from the very beginning. Although it may look quite easy from the crowd, I assure you that both pilots are working extremely hard to maintain the right separation from each other. When flying in formation, the rotor diameter is what they use for their separation. So when flying close formation, they can go as close as 1/3 of a rotor diameter. Over the shoulder manoeuvre, which is basically reversing direction to say that 643 will then fly forwards. That's Chris now doing an over his shoulder departure. With that final break, that concludes the Black Cats display. I hope you enjoyed the display and the rest of your time here at Duxford. Thank you very much for having us. A big thank you for carrier-borne strikes of the war. There were other times that the tactical staff would ask for napalm, as was always put in the centre station. And it's also worth, I think, Colin, dedicating that Sea Fury display which was performed by Lieutenant Commander to all the air arm pilots who lost their lives. Heading back up north to Brayton, lives with the sumptuous fleet of vintage aircraft operated by the Real Aeroplane Company. Next up, he's followed by Justin Needham in the L9TD Bird Dog, returning to Lincolnshire. Sea Fury taxis backtracking along the hard runway with wings folded. Also got
ladies and gentlemen, because this isn't a flying boat, nor is it a seaplane. It is in fact an amphibian. aircraft represents the type that literally did plug that gap. And together with the use of radar, in fact, ultimately defeated the U-boats.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, some more of the great
greater numbers, and they make 12,000 of those, although some were licensed built abroad, taking the total to about 18. And issued to Air Materiel Command in February 1949. One aircraft presented here in its typical Korean War marking. Knots in order to keep it within sight of everybody here without exceeding the 4G drop tank limit. At the end of its flying life, ended up at a technical training school in California, and was eventually factory scrapped. The emotional attachment. Look at that, isn't that beautiful? Let's finish this one yet.
Also, no doubt, in the other aviation magazines, and as I mentioned, on the IWM website.
So, meanwhile, thanks for your attendance, and good afternoon.
Thank you very much. That was Colin Wilshire. I'm Ben Dunnell. Goodbye, and hope to see you again at Duxford in 2012.